Here is another common AWS interview question. What is the difference between on-demand instances and spot instances in EC2, and when would you use one over the other? The short answer is this. On-demand instances let you pay as you go with no upfront commitments. They give guaranteed availability and no interruptions, but they are more expensive. Spot instances, on the other hand, let you use spare AWS capacity at discounts up to 90%, but they can be interrupted with as little as 2 minutes notice. You use on-demand for critical workloads, and spot for fault-tolerant, flexible workloads like batch processing or development environments. Now let's go deeper. On-demand pricing is predictable and simple. You pay per second or per hour depending on the operating system. This makes it ideal for production systems where availability is critical. There are no surprises. If you launch an instance, you know it will run until you stop or terminate it, and you only pay for the time it runs. The trade-off is cost. On-demand has the highest hourly price. Spot instances take advantage of unused capacity in AWS data centers. If AWS needs that capacity back, your spot instances can be terminated with a 2-minute warning. That makes them unsuitable for critical production systems, but extremely powerful for workloads that can handle interruptions. This includes big data analytics, machine learning training jobs, rendering farms, CI/CD pipelines, and other batch-oriented tasks. Let's look at some industry examples. In an e-commerce company, the checkout service is mission-critical. You cannot afford for it to be interrupted. That should always run on on-demand instances, or possibly reserved instances if you know your usage patterns. But the recommendation engine that trains models on historical purchase data can run on spot instances, because if a training job stops midway, you can resume from a checkpoint without hurting customers. In finance, the trade execution system should never run on spot. Even a few minutes of downtime can cost millions. But overnight risk analysis, report generation, or Monte Carlo simulations are perfect for spot. In biotech, genome sequencing jobs that take hours or days can be distributed across hundreds of spot instances. If a few fail, the system retries them. The savings here can be massive. Now let's talk about challenges. The most common mistake is trying to run production-critical workloads entirely on spot. This leads to outages when instances are terminated. The best practice is to use a mixed strategy. Run the critical path on on-demand or reserved instances, and use spot for the background or non-critical workers. Another challenge is managing interruptions. You need to design your applications to be fault-tolerant. That means using checkpoints, storing intermediate results in S3, and making workloads idempotent so they can be retried safely. There is also the challenge of complexity. Spot pricing and availability fluctuate, so managing fleets by hand is difficult. The fix is to use Spot Fleet, EC2 auto-scaling with mixed instance policies, or higher-level services like AWS Batch that manage spot capacity automatically. Now what about alternatives? If you have long-term predictable workloads, reserved instances or savings plans give you significant discounts without the risk of interruption. For containers, ECS or EKS with Fargate lets you offload lifecycle management. For short, event-driven tasks, Lambda avoids EC2 altogether. Expect follow-up questions like these in interviews. When would you choose spot over on-demand? The right answer is when the workload is fault-tolerant, flexible, and can handle interruptions, such as batch jobs or analytics. Another question might be, how do you protect critical workloads but still take advantage of spot? The answer is, use a combination. Keep the critical parts on on-demand, and scale out the non-critical parts with spot. A good interviewer may ask how to design such a system. You could explain that you would use auto-scaling groups with mixed instance types, configure health checks, and use S3 for state persistence. To recap, on-demand gives reliability, predictability, and zero interruptions at a higher cost. Spot gives huge cost savings but requires you to design for interruptions. In interviews, always answer with both the technical difference and the business trade-off. Say something like, I would always run the critical path on on-demand, and push cost-sensitive, fault-tolerant workloads to spot to save money. That shows you can think like both an engineer and an architect.